Okay, we'll keep things moving here today and turn our attention to the Saskatchewan Polytechnique. Thank you so much to the leadership and officials that have joined us here today and those that have been involved in this work. I want to welcome Ms. Cheryl Schmitz, who's the CFO and VP who's joined us, along with other officials. I'd ask Ms. Schmitz to briefly introduce the other officials that are with her here today, refrain from other comments at this point on the chapter. We'll kick it over to the auditor and then back to you for subsequent response.
And we're very pleased to be here today. Again, I'm Cheryl Schmitz, and I'm the CFO and Vice President Administrative Services. And to my left is Dr. Haas Malik. He's our Provost and Vice President Academic. And to my right, I have Kevin Rogers, who's our Director of Applied Research. And we also have Sean Engeman. He's our Associate Vice President of Financial Services, right behind me to my left.
I'll turn it over to the provincial auditor to focus on, I think, the first two chapters together.
So thank you, Mr. Chair, Deputy Chair, committee members and officials. With me today is Mr. Trevor St. John. He's the Deputy Provincial Auditor who was previously responsible for the portfolio of work that did include Saskatchewan Polytechnic. Trevor's going to present the three chapters on the agenda in the order they do appear. He'll present the first two chapters together. There's one new recommendation in those two chapters for the committee's consideration, and then there's 5 new recommendations in the very last chapter. I do want to thank the officials from the Saskatchewan Polytechnic for the cooperation that was extended to our office during the course of our work. With that, I'll turn it over to Trevor.
All right, thank you. The first two chapters both report on the annual integrated results of our audit of Saskatchewan Polytechnic. Our integrated audits found that Saskatchewan Polytechnic had effective rules and procedures to safeguard public resources, complied with relevant authorities, and had reliable financial statements. Though both chapters included our findings related to a separate significant matter, the recommendation in Chapter 14 of our 2019 report, Volume 2, is a new recommendation. We recommended Saskatchewan Polytechnic establish a policy to guide compensating for losses of its employees. In August 2018, a member of Saskatchewan Polytechnic's management fell victim to a phishing scam, and the organization compensated the victim for their personal loss that came out of their bank account, their own bank account. Unlike Treasury Board, Saskatchewan Polytechnic did not have a compensation for loss payments policy to guide payments for these circumstances. We consider Treasury Board's compensation for loss payments policy to be good practice. While Saskatchewan Polytechnic is not required to follow this policy, their payment to the member of management for compensation for their loss would not have met criteria for payment in Treasury Board's policy. We continue to make this recommendation in our 2020 report, Volume 2, which can be found on page 88 of that report. While Saskatchewan Polytechnic did not further compensate any employees for losses incurred during 2019-20, it had compensated students for theft of their tools stored on its premises. During the 2021 fiscal year, Saskatchewan Polytechnic implemented our recommendation. It established a policy and procedures to guide compensating losses of all members of its community, including employees, students, volunteers, board members, and the general public. I'll stop now for the committee's consideration.
Thanks for the report and the focus. I'll table at this point now PAC 7029, Saskatchewan Polytechnic status update dated September 6, 2022. And thank you to the officials who put together that status update for us. And just one reminder for officials, you don't need to touch the microphones at all. You'll be identified by folks over here and things will light up. I'll turn it over for a brief response, then we'll open it up for a few questions.
So I just first of all like to say thanks for the opportunity to discuss the issue and recommendation under review. And on behalf of Saskatchewan Polytechnic, we'd like to thank the Provincial Auditor of Saskatchewan for the comprehensive work of your office. We appreciate the advice provided on the recommendations before us. And today, as we are here to provide information on Chapter 14 in the 2019 report, Volume 2, and Chapter 14 in the 2020 report, Volume 2, both of which concern the establishment of a policy to guide compensation for losses of employees. I'm pleased to advise that this recommendation has been fully implemented.
Thank you very much for the work on this front, that report. Any questions from committee members with respect to these chapters? Ms. Young.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, officials, for being present today and all the work that's gone into preparing for this afternoon as well. Looking at these two chapters in conjunction, I just have a couple questions. Are you able to, for the committee, provide just like a very high-level overview of the situation that occurred in 2018 with the member of management and falling victim to, I believe it was a phishing scam?
So we had a member of our HR management team contacted via phone and text, and it was a phishing scam, a request. It looked like a request that our president was asking for some money wired, and she did do that through a Western Union wire, and it ended up being a phishing scam. We found out about it the next day when she talked to the president about it, and it wasn't a phishing email through our system or anything. It came to her through text and a phone call, I believe.
Sounds fairly sophisticated. Was this the first occurrence of something of that nature for the institution?
Yes.
And I think I noted in there nothing like that has happened since.
No.
Okay. So having seen the initial findings in, I think they're both Chapter 14 in 2019, and then the follow-up in 2020, had Sask Poly received and reviewed the findings of the 2019 report prior to the compensation for students who had had their tools stolen, I believe?
We did. The policy had not been passed at that point. It was just being drafted, and so that compensation was made for the students' loss of tools. But now we do have the policy in place, and it covers students, employees, board members, and volunteers.
Okay, great. So the policy had been considered, was under development, but not yet formally approved by the board. Okay, great. Are these the only situations of losses that would have occurred during this audit time?
Yes.
Okay. And just speaking to the specific time period, I guess, covered by these two audits, when Sask Poly compensated either management or students for losses occurred, does this money come from insurance or does this come directly from Sask Poly?
So the money came directly from Sask Poly I believe, and I'm going to ask Sean, I don't think it met our insurance minimum.
So then with the new policy that has been developed and implemented, can you speak to what the policy covers? I understand from the updates that it's for kind of the whole community as a whole. But could you detail for the committee what this loss policy looks like, kind of the process for accessing loss payments, criteria?
Do you want an outline
Sure.
of the policy? Okay, certainly. So it's very similar to the one that was recommended by Treasury, but obviously we had to add students to it and volunteers and board members. So basically the guiding principles, it's really for safekeeping of personal property, and we will not be compensating for anything such as phishing anymore to our students or to employees. And it would not exceed $2,000 for any individual. There are some, the policy for lost personal property may be paid with the approval of the member of Senior Management Council, but there has to be certain criteria that are met. And that criteria is, so the individual was required to have that piece of equipment, for example, as part of on SAS Poly premises. Reasonable care has been taken to protect against the loss, and compensation is based on a reasonable replacement cost, and it would have to be approved by a member of a senior management council, which would be either myself or Hawes or the president.
Thank you very much. With the development of and implementation of this new policy, are there any accompanying risk mitigation strategies? For example, you noted that individuals wouldn't be compensated on a go-forward basis for something like the phishing scam that the one individual fell victim to. Are there ongoing training or mitigation strategies that the institution has undertaken to help raise awareness within employee groups or students or faculty?
And even before this, we had regular education of our faculty, staff, and students on phishing, how to avoid phishing, what are some of the common items that they can look for if a phishing email, for example, would come in, and how to mitigate against that. We have also increased that education to our faculty and students and staff. We have some new Microsoft software in place that is really quite state-of-the-art software that is helping identify phishing emails. October coming up is Cybersecurity Awareness Month, so we will be doing extra notification to our faculty, staff, and students, but it is ongoing, absolutely.
Deputy Chair Hargrave.
As you're talking about cybersecurity, I know it's not part of this technically, but it's just a massive issue everywhere, and the university and polytechs and every learning sort of institution. I mean, there's so much information that can be stolen there and affect people's education, ongoing education. How is, I'm not asking what it is, but how is your cybersecurity and how often is it reviewed?
We have a very, we're very invested in our cybersecurity. We put a lot of resources in cybersecurity, especially since the beginning of the pandemic, and we have students and staff that were training or working from home, but we have invested quite heavily in cybersecurity and have resources on hand. We have staff on hand, a team of cybersecurity on hand, and it is something that is very top of mind for Saskatchewan Polytechnic.
Not seeing any further questions. Thanks so much for all the work on this front and for the answers and information here today. With respect to Chapter 14 from the 2019 report, there's a new recommendation there, and I'd welcome a motion to concur and note compliance. Moved by Mr. Gowdy. All agreed? That's carried. With respect to the Chapter 14 from the 2020 report, I'd simply look for a motion to conclude consideration. Moved by Mr. Lemeg. All in favor? That's agreed as well. We'll move now to Chapter 22, and I'll turn it back over to the Provincial Auditor.
Thank you. So, Chapter 22 of our 2020 report, Volume 2, starts on page 165, and reports the results of our audit of Saskatchewan Polytechnic's processes to carry out applied research. We did this audit at Saskatchewan Polytechnic as they identify applied research as a key area of focus. It aims to have its applied research support Saskatchewan's productivity and economic prosperity, enable the organization to keep current with industry needs, and provide opportunities for students to enhance their learning experience. Saskatchewan Polytechnic's Office of Applied Research and Innovation, at the time of our audit, had 20 faculty and almost 100 students involved in applied research activities over SAS Polytechnic's 4 campuses. The organization's applied research funding has grown from $642,000 in 2014-15 to $6.3 million in 2020-2021. With over half of the funding coming from external sources, including federal research funding agencies, industry partners, or a combination. Effective applied research processes can assist research organizations with having their projects stand up to scrutiny, making suitable resources available, and appropriately monitoring project budgets and timelines. Such processes support making informed decisions, maintains the financial viability of research activities, and helps protect Saskatchewan Polytechnic's reputation with industry partners and funding agencies. Overall, we concluded Saskatchewan Polytechnic had effective processes to carry out research for the 12-month period ended January 31st, 2020, other than the areas addressed in our 5 recommendations. I will now focus on those 5 recommendations. On page 170, we recommend Saskatchewan Polytechnic broaden the measures used to assess the success of its applied research beyond annual growth in research revenue. Saskatchewan Polytechnic established measures to evaluate the achievement of its applied research objectives through the measures primarily focused on generating research revenues, including the number and dollar value of external applied research grants each year and the annual growth in applied research revenues. Saskatchewan Polytechnic did not consider other measures of performance such as quality, for example, rate of satisfaction of organizations to whom Saskatchewan Polytechnic provides research. Use of measures other than those that focus on revenue generation can assist Saskatchewan Polytechnic in evaluating its processes to secure applied research projects and in providing its stakeholders with the best research products possible. Measurement of the quality of applied research can reduce risks to an organization's reputation and improve its ability to generate applied research funding in the future. The second recommendation can be found on page 174. We recommend that Saskatchewan Polytechnic confirm staff and students reaffirm their commitment to the Code of Conduct at least annually as required by their policy. Annually, Saskatchewan Polytechnic sends a reminder to staff and students to electronically complete the requirement for reaffirming their commitment to the Code of Conduct policy. We tested 19 applied research projects and found 4 faculty and 5 students involved in these projects had not completed the acknowledgement within the last year, ranging from just over a year to 11 years ago. Annual acknowledgement of the Code of Conduct policy provides staff and students with reminders of acceptable business practices and the need to consider whether they have any new conflicts of interest to disclose. Our next recommendation is on page 177. We recommend that Saskatchewan Polytechnic always document its assessment of the associated key risks of externally funded applied research projects prior to deciding to pursue the project. We found Saskatchewan Polytechnic used well-defined processes to evaluate risks and feasibility of potential projects financed through federal research funding or internal funding. Such projects typically required research to complete funding applications addressing this information. However, processes to evaluate other types of externally funded potential projects were less formal. For all 4 external projects not requiring the completion of an application we tested, Saskatchewan Polytechnic did not document its consideration of risks within the project files. For 3 of those 4 projects, Saskatchewan Polytechnic did not document assessment of its ability to complete the projects. Example, whether it had appropriate expertise to do the project. Our discussions with the assigned researcher and staff from the research office found it had informally considered the risks associated with these projects. Not formally documenting the evaluation and consideration of risks of all potentially externally funded applied research projects increases the risk informal evaluations are incomplete or do not occur. This could result in Saskatchewan Polytechnic undertaking projects that it cannot complete or is not well suited to complete, especially as it grows in this area. As Saskatchewan Polytechnic's strategy is to grow its applied research activities, growth in research activities increases the risk of the research office not being able to maintain the same high level of involvement and to recall the basis of decisions about project viability and acceptance. Recommendation 4 is on page 179. We recommend Saskatchewan Polytechnic establish guidance about requiring funding agreements with industry partners involved in applied research projects. We found research office staff use their judgment when determining the need for establishing a funding agreement with an industry partner. Such agreements would typically set out responsibilities of the parties involved, funding details, termination conditions, key deliverables, and associated project deadlines. The Research Office had not specifically established when it required such agreements with industry partners. For 5 of 10 externally funded research projects we tested involving both an external funding agency and an industry partner, Saskatchewan Polytechnic did not enter into a funding agreement with the industry partner. Not establishing funding agreements with industry partners increases the risk Saskatchewan Polytechnic not recovering verbally agreed upon project funding if a partner were to terminate its involvement with a project. Such circumstances could jeopardize Saskatchewan Polytechnic's ability to complete the project and meet its deliverables to other stakeholders, such as federal granting agencies where industry partners match federal funding. Our last recommendation can be found on page 180. We recommend Saskatchewan Polytechnic maintain an accurate and complete inventory of its applied research projects, project status, project dates, and ethics approvals. At the time of our audit, the Research Office had recently started using 2 spreadsheets to track and maintain an inventory of its external applied research projects, one for projects receiving funding from federal agencies and another for projects involving funding agreements with industry partners. We reviewed the Research Office's project inventory spreadsheets and found that 9 of the 10 projects tested were appropriately included in the spreadsheet. 1 project was mistakenly included in both spreadsheets. However, for the 7 of the 10 projects tested, we found the spreadsheets did not include up-to-date information on the project status, project dates, or ethics approvals. Improving its documentation of research projects will better position Saskatchewan Polytechnic to track and report on projects as it grows its applied research activities and has an increased number of projects. Thank you. That concludes my comments.
Thank you for the presentation, for the work on this front. I'll turn it over to Ms. Schmitz to respond briefly, and then we'll have questions.
Turn it over to Dr. Malik.
Good afternoon. Yeah, I'll be happy to speak to Chapter 22 of the 2020 report, Volume 2. It addresses the processes around applied research at Saskatchewan Polytechnic. The auditor concluded that Saskatchewan Polytechnic has effective processes to carry out applied research, which you just heard about, with 5 recommendations for improvements. These recommendations include broadening measures to used to assess success, annually confirming commitment to the code of conduct by students and staff, documenting key risks as a criterion for determining externally funded projects, establishing guidance regarding required funding agreements with industry partners, and maintaining an accurate and complete inventory of applied research projects. I'm pleased to report that all 5 recommendations in Chapter 22 have also been fully implemented. Happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thanks for the report. Thanks for the implementation. I'll open it up to committee members for questions. Ms. Young?
Thank you. Perhaps to begin, I just had a question about a metric used on page 169 under section 4.1, where it notes that Sask Polytech established a revenue growth target of 5% for 18-19 and then 41% for 19-20, which feels like a fairly significant jump. And I'm wondering if you could expand on that.
The whole process for Sask Polytech, I mean, the referencing back to the numbers from 2014 is pretty much a reflection of the emphasis of the institution. That emphasis has continued, and actually this year was another record growth. So I believe this year we were well over 8 million in external and 11 million in combined. So it is a reflection of simply emphasis by the institution. We're pursuing a lot more grants. There are many more faculty who are involved. So the expectation is we're going to continue to see a significant level of growth.
Congratulations. And in those areas of growth, are the grants primarily federal? Are they coming from the province? Are they industry partnerships? Can you speak to the nature of the growth for SAS Poly?
The bulk of it is either federal granting agencies or industry. We are now seeing some provincial grant process through things like the Ag Development Fund, that kind of thing. But the emphasis primarily is federal, NSERC, along with the industry-associated funding. In terms of other funding, one of the other large ones has been National Research Council. So that's been the bulk of it, along then with Prairie's Can.
Cool. And one last question on this. Sorry, it's just the level of growth is remarkable, and I think really should be celebrated. With the growth, particularly in regards to some of those federal opportunities, whether NSERC or the NRC that you cited, are those, you'd be much more familiar than me, are those expansions of the existing programming, or is it more a matter of SAS Poly is now more actively pursuing the opportunities that are there?
It would primarily be the active pursuit. As I said, we've got a lot more people doing this now, a lot more dedicated researchers who are undertaking projects. So most of the growth is simply we're pursuing it a lot harder than we ever had been prior to about 2016.
Remarkable, makes these recommendations, I suppose, all the more timely.
We've gone through.
Thanks. So moving on to the recommendations themselves, the first recommendation, which we noted is obviously implemented, can you speak to the metrics that were selected for annual reporting? I note they include the annual research revenue, number of research projects, number of faculty and researchers, engaged in applied research, and number of students who are employed as part of those ongoing projects. Why were those specifically chosen as metrics to report out on for the institution?
They were chosen to give a little bit more broad perspective in terms of the work we undertake. One of the primary focuses for us has always been students, and so to reflect their involvement in the process. The number of projects and industry partners was to attempt to bring in sort of our interaction with industry as a whole. We have started the process to survey on quality. There is some of that takes place through NSERC and NRC as well, but our findings so far is it's an extremely hit and miss proposition. Response rates are poor. The metrics, we do have some, they're extremely positive at this point, but they're also a small set. So it's not something that we're at a point yet we can say, here's the customer satisfaction level. So that grouping was what we attempted to put together to show a little more broadly, here's what we're doing year over year.
Pardon me, I think I missed it, the hit and miss portion of the feedback, is that from federal partners or is that from industry?
The NSERC basically has indicated to us they take kind of the first stab at doing surveying. So for any federally funded operation for a project, even if we've got an industry partner, they're the ones who are doing the initial assessment. And we get some degree of reporting from NSERC. It's not complete, but they do give us an indication as to what they've found overall. Their indication on hit and miss is very much what we've experienced as well. The National Research Council does the same sort of thing with projects that we engage in through the IRAP program. They're the ones who will do the initial surveying. We've tried to avoid duplication for the most part. So we're a little at their mercy in terms of their response rate. Anything not covered by those is what we've undertaken ourselves now to start targeting for responses. Most of that is industry oriented. We're not looking to any of the granting agencies, that kind of thing.
And for the committee, can you expand on the current state of what sounds like a bit of a nascent process, but specifically for that feedback from industry partners?
Over the last year, we have finally made arrangements with NSERC to receive at least a summary of what they've found. It's traditionally not something they have done, and we're actually a little concerned about letting loose. The National Research Council, again, they're very early stage for their own surveying systems. Ours started over the last year, basically. It's been this fiscal year that we've started to undertake our own. Response rate, in general, I would say is in the 20-25% range. So it's not significant at this point.
But the response rate, in the opinion of officials, wouldn't necessarily be indicative of dissatisfaction, just,
No. At this point, the approval rate that we were finding, we were asking a number of questions, would you do another project, these kinds of things, and the response rate at this point, or the responses at this point, are indicating a very high level of satisfaction, but again, quite low numbers.
One further question about research with industry partners. It's noted on page 173 of Chapter 22 that Sask Poly has a template with standard wording for non-disclosure agreements with industry partners. And that these are signed kind of at the request of industry partners. Not knowing much about this, are NDAs ever signed for projects that are funded with public money, or do NDAs exist for projects that are solely industry funded?
With pure public funding, we have not generally been signing NDAs. The public reporting aspect is usually one that would make it questionable whether it's a worthwhile exercise. So at this point, yeah, our NDA process is pretty much oriented toward industry. We've actually become more proactive as well. We're actually suggesting them now to a number of companies, especially when we're dealing within technology items.
Detection of commercialized research and.
Yeah.
On recommendation 4.5, and the confirmation of staff and students reaffirming commitments to the code of conduct at least annually. Can you speak to, does Sask Poly as an organization have a regular review of their policies and processes that this would be a part of to ensure that this code of conduct is updated, with semi-regular frequency to ensure it remains current and relevant to the institution?
Yes, we have a governance structure set up where policies have to be reviewed. If they're a board policy, they have to be reviewed. I believe it's every 5 years. 3 for the board and 5 for the non-board, so the operational policies. And so that's regularly reviewed, and as indicated, that staff also sign off annually on the code of conduct and up to date on their policies. So, yeah, and we have a governance person responsible for our governance and our policy piece, and so they're reviewed annually, and to ensure that we know which ones are coming up and that they get approved and reviewed.
Excellent. And that code of conduct obviously would include like basic conflict of interest declaration for students and staff. And okay. Awesome. For the third recommendation, focused on the documentation of assessments of associated key risks to externally funded applied research projects. Is it fair, having read this, to characterize this as a bit of a distinction between industry-funded projects and federally funded projects at the institution?
I would say it's probably more a reflection of size on the project. The larger projects are documented, but what we had was in small instances and sometimes down to a couple $1,000s where we were simply invoicing. That has been clarified now so that we have a standard operating procedure setting the level at $5,000 that we can consider simply going through the invoice route with supplementary documentation. Anything over that has to be a fully written and signed agreement.
And would that threshold include like real and in-kind, or is that?
That's cash,
Okay.
not the in-kind.
In the next recommendation, sorry, trying to go through these somewhat sequentially, it's identified by the auditor's report that not having funding agreements with industry partners could potentially increase the risk of Sask Poly not recovering verbally agreed upon project funding were a termination of the project to occur. Has an instance of this ever occurred at Sask Poly?
Not at this point, no. But did recover the funds. It was actually through a My Tax grant.
Oh, interesting. Then I suppose, sorry, pardon me, I missed one question, but perhaps it's kind of related to both the third and fifth recommendations, as I believe both have the actions implemented cited as the new applied research management database. Can you expand for the committee about the risk assessment that's contained as a part of that new database?
One of the mandatory fields within the database does reference the risk aspect. We've provided examples and require that they be indicated that there was consideration, and in the event there was something, then an explanation as to the further steps. Those are primarily oriented toward financial risk, reputational risk, but then as well capacity risk, making sure that we can actually do this, and then if there's something outside of those, there's an other category to indicate here's some other things that were considered. That field is going to have to be filled out by the person initially putting the application into the database, and nothing goes forward without that process being completed.
And with this new ARMS database, when was this system implemented?
We've been working on it for about 2 years now. We've gone fully to it as of July 1st of this year for our fiscal. We've been maintaining the Excel aspect up till now. We're actually going to run both for this fiscal year just to make sure we're catching everything. But that's the plan to go forward.
Okay, great. And is this, pardon me if I missed this, is this a database that was developed in-house, or is this subcontracted out, or?
We were working with Red River College on something they had started to develop, and since then, over the last year and a half, 2 years, we've been pretty much putting it together with our in-house digital center, DICE. They've got it developed to the point now where it's an ongoing thing for us.
And recognizing it's only been in place for, I suppose, not quite 2 months yet, the level of satisfaction thus far from those responsible for as well as utilizing this system?
So far, it's good. We did beta test it for about 6 months in advance, worked through a number of hiccups through that process. So far, so good. Yeah. We'll know a little better as well as we hit reporting periods for metrics, that kind of thing. That's one of the reasons for running both systems. We know that our capacity to address metrics out of the Excel system is very good, and that's something we still have to work through with the new database. We have no issues with it in relation to tracking, but it's how well we can manage to make it report to us the way we want it to.
And reading the recommendation from the auditor that Sask Poly maintain an accurate and complete inventory of its research projects, is the intent or I suppose is the current state that this would be retroactive, include projects back a number of years, or is this a new database only going forward?
We're going to be putting everything in, and that's part of the process we're undergoing now, is to bring in all of the prior ones. The initial emphasis was on current ones, but we are going to bring in the historical ones as well, as best we can. You get back to the 2014 to 16 range, it gets a little sketchy.
Cool. No more questions from me. Thank you.
Good questions, too. Any further questions from committee members? Not seeing any right now. Thank you as well for all the work on this front and the fact that these 5 recommendations have been implemented. Thanks to all those that have been involved in the work. I would welcome a motion to concur with the 5 recommendations and note compliance. Moved by Mr. Myers. All agreed? That's carried. All right. That's all of our business with the Polytechnic. Thank you so much to the leadership that's here today, and thank you to everyone that's involved in the work. All the best to all the leadership team, the faculty, the students in the year ahead. Any final remarks, Ms. Schmitz?
No, I'd just like to thank the committee today, and also to the provincial auditor for all their help. These audits are very helpful, and so we always, the information is always very helpful to us, and so we just thank you for the work that you've done on this as well.
Thanks so much. We'll have a very brief recess, and WDM is up next.